and welcome to another episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington and Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, I've made it to this one, Tom. I'm very much looking forward to talking to Michael tonight. So I am here, I'm ready, and he's got my full attention for this entire
Very
section.
good. Yes, so Emma was conspicuously absent from our recent episode with Meg Lee and Jim Heel.
I had a day that ran away with me and conspired against me in every possible way. So my apologies to Jim and to Meg.
We're here with you now, Mike. So welcome to Mind the Gap.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
No, we're really looking forward to this conversation. And what we often ask guests to do is, rather than sort of making a hash of introducing. In fact, recently I did a thing where I was introduced to someone who had a degree in natural sciences from Cambridge University, and I don't have a degree in natural sciences from Cambridge. I was thinking I've been kind of, awarded an honorary degree there, but so to avoid that issue, we just ask people to say it for themselves. So tell people a bit about what you do, kind of how your work is split, and your kind of area of interest.
Sure. Okay. So I started teaching straight from university, basically, and actually went back to my old school as certainly a surprising number of people seem to do when you talk to them. And so I learned to teach there. I did a sort of GTP, so school-centered training there. And then 5 years there, then worked at an international school for a few years. And sort of over that time of kind of learning how to do it, the whole sort of sink or swim of how to become a teacher, became quite interested in research. And I'd done a psychology degree, but actually never really looked very much at the sort of cognitive psychology of learning or those sorts of things. I'd be more interested in other areas. In fact, I sort of vividly remember it being my least favourite of any of the modules I did at university. But sort of, I guess, with time and that sort of professional focus that you get from seeing it every day, became very interested in that area and started reading educational research. And then when my fiance, now wife, were going to move back to the UK, so we were sort of, we were definitely going to change jobs. I thought, well, I might as well just see if I can get involved in research in some way. So very fortunately managed to find a supervisor that took me on to do a PhD. So I had 4 years out of the classroom doing a PhD at University College London, looking at attention and distraction in sort of everyday settings, but really mostly in educational settings, and actually sort of trying to contribute to some of the research on that. And there wasn't very much, and there still isn't very much, despite my best efforts. But really, that was a real privilege, I think, to have this sort of time and opportunity to take that time out and really, really delve, very deeply. And then following that, came back into the classroom. So I finished the PhD late 2019, came back into the classroom early 2020, had 6 weeks, everything closed down for COVID. So it was about 18 months before everything kind of got normal again. And then ever since then, I've been teaching full time, but also sort of still trying to stay involved in various research projects and research related activities, and sort of keep a foot in the academic camp. But in effect, I'm an academic in my spare time, because I can't really find a way to make those roles work together. And in school roles and sort of joint roles just don't really exist in teaching. They do in medicine, for example. That'd be quite a normal thing in medicine, but they just don't in teaching. So I'm an academic in the evenings and when the children are asleep. But actually, I'm a full-time paid teacher, and so that's my primary role these days.
Well, that's so interesting. I've wondered how you manage that, because I've seen you. You describe yourself as a researcher and a teacher. I was thinking, have you got some really cool like hybrid job role?
Yeah,
actually,
I wish.
You really are. You are like moonlighting as a researcher. You're doing a good job of it.
Yeah. and increasingly badly, really. And I'd love to be able to combine them. And there are, I think I know of maybe 2 or 3 people in the country who sort of managed to juggle those roles in some way. And they're all basically in kind of bespoke positions where they've written their own job description and managed to sort of tout it to the right people in the right place. But there's sort of no official mechanism for that. And you just have to be very lucky and I guess know the right people and have funding streams available to you in both places. And that's sort of the only way to do it, unfortunately. And I haven't quite managed to be persuasive enough so far.
So do you find, I mean, before we get into the actual content, is because a lot of people have like, our researchers, like, we are academics in a different context. So
Yeah.
we've spoken to, for example, Anna Stocky, who's a maths professor, but she's really interested in maths education, but she only in a sort of slightly part-time part of a foundation. She runs a kind of after-school teaching, so she doesn't directly teach children beyond that. But also there's that Dan Whittingham, who's a researcher, and he has students at the university.
Yeah.
And then you have lots of teachers like who are consumers of research, but to be someone who's literally doing both. And so do you find that when you're teaching, your awareness of the research coming through into your practice is kind of quite vivid?
I think so. I mean, I feel like if I think back to, to when I started teaching, I have a much clearer sort of idea of what my rationale is for doing a thing. I think it has given me that. It's given me a very clear understanding of why I have decided to do a thing, which isn't, and maybe we sort of get onto this later, but that's not necessarily because the research says I should and I should do it this way, because the research doesn't tell you that. It can't tell you that how you should do it for you, but it gives me that starting point, and then I can then take that and refine it. And so I think I would say, when I started, there were probably relatively few things that I did very intentionally. I did a lot of things to fill the lesson, and I did a lot of things that were tangentially related to the topic. I think almost everything I do now is a lot more intentional and has a particular foundation, and that's nice. That's reassuring. And I think it's nice that I can think that. It's also nice to be able to share that actually with the students and to be able to say, right, I'm asking you to do this because of X, Y, and Z, and this is what you should expect if you do it properly. And so that I do find that. There is, of course, you can go too far because you can then sort of get kind of choice paralysis. If you're aware of all the possible approaches and all the potential drawbacks, and you've read all of it, you read too much, you end up, in the same way that when you, or at least I find, if you confronted by 250 different types of jam in the supermarket and you just stand there and you can't possibly decide what you're supposed to get, it is exactly the same sort of idea.
Sometimes you just want to get one, like
can you see it? I just wish there was just one way to do it. But I mean, I think that certainly that above and beyond the particular strategies I use, it's that intentionality that I do really feel now compared to before. Yeah.
Right, we should get into it now. So Emma, are you paying attention? We've made lots of jokes.
100% attention with notes. What I was going to say, that's really interesting, because you've obviously kind of, although it might be in a slightly different ratio now, still got one foot in the research camp, one foot in the teaching camp. So how can a teacher, or how should a teacher, or how might a teacher, if they haven't got a foot in the research camp, how can they bridge that gap between the research, the findings, and the implementation of that best decision making? Because you're doing it with a foot in both camps. So how can a teacher best do it when they've not necessarily been on that side of the fence?
That's right, and where we can't expect people to be spending, I do it because I'm a geek and I quite enjoy those things, but lots of far more normal people shouldn't be expected to spend that time doing that. I mean, I completely agree. I think that is a question that I've thought about for the last 10 years, and I don't I don't really have a particularly good answer. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I'd have been much more sort of along the lines of, I think teachers should be forced, maybe not quite the right word, but in some way mandated to be involved in engaging with research and engaging with research findings. It should be a compulsory part of your CPD or something like that. And I would love that to be the case, but the reality on the ground is the time is not available for most people to be engaging with things at that level of depth. So that, I think, sort of means there probably has to be some kind of intermediate, or these kind of gatekeepers, perhaps, this layer of people who transmit research evidence, which of course is potentially dangerous, because we have to then trust them and trust that the way that they're reporting it is correct. But I think they're probably inevitable to have that layer of people. Then I suppose the question becomes, then, if we're accepting that actually, we're not expecting teachers to be reading the entire research papers, what level should they need to know? How much do you need to know? And actually, I think that there's still this, even if we don't have a professional expectation where you have to read a research paper, I think we should have a professional expectation that if you're going to do anything in your classroom, you should know why you think it's going to work. You should be informed as to the probable mechanism for why you think this is going to be a success. So I do think there's quite a high burden actually on teachers to know why it is they're doing the thing that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so that is still quite a high bar. Maybe the way we sort of free up more space for that then is we actually ask teachers to work on fewer things at any one time. You only have one thing that you're working on, only one CPD target rather than 4 or 5, as many schools will sort of ask you to set. But you know exactly why you're doing it. You've actually read a bit around why that is likely to work. Because of course, if it doesn't work, or if it does work, how do you know how you're going to make it better, or how you're going to fix it, unless you know what it was supposed to do and why it was supposed to work in the first place? So I think we have to, we do have to sort of have a reasonable grip of the research from that angle.
I think you're right, though, that it's kind of inevitable. I mean, it's just de facto. Most teachers just don't know that it's even there to look at. It's just there's so many things. Yeah. So I actually feel like we should get into the core stuff that you're focusing on now, because it's so interesting. And I'm going to base a lot of my questions around stuff that you've written on your blog, which has the best name of any blog, which is called Hobbilog. Hobbilog at wordpress.com. And honestly, it's just superb. I mean, you haven't written like thousands of blogs, but the ones you are there are brilliant, and it sort of matches in some of your other things that I've seen where you research ed talks and so on. So I want, but I'm not sure if it's even on the blog, but I want to ask you a question about a talk I saw you do, and I've referred to it many times in my talk since, so I hope I'm getting this right, which is about the reasons why the core reasons for distraction in a lesson, and the research about that. What are the key things that prevent students or interrupt attention in a typical lesson setting, and what the evidence is around that. So I don't know if that's something you can just.
Sure. So that was something that came out of my PhD, which was a sort of a not particularly imaginative thing to do, but seemingly was the first time this had been done in the research, which was we just asked the students. So they came out of a classroom lesson, and in various sort of settings, but so they come out of a school lesson, for example, and secondary school. This is where we were doing it, and they'd immediately do a questionnaire that just said, okay, which of the following things were you distracted by, and can you estimate the number of minutes within that lesson that thing was distracting for you? So clearly that's going to be a pretty rough gauge. Students aren't going to be able to do that with really precise accuracy, but it gives you a pretty good idea of what sorts of things that they think are distracting them and how much. so what sort of came out from that was that the biggest student reported distraction was other people, other, most other students in the room, which probably won't be a surprise to anyone. The next two, which were about sort of very similar to each other, were mind wandering and background noise. So they were both sort of about 9% of the time was the sort of rough estimate. Then there were a couple to do with mobile phones. So sort of social media was a category, and then other mobile phone related distraction. And they were both sort of, again, quite similar. That would be an interesting one to follow up on. I mean, that was data I collected in 2016 probably, at which point far fewer schools had strict mobile phone policies than they will do today. When I repeated that in a different school, which did have a stricter mobile phone policy, as you might imagine, that was much, much lower. And then a couple of other sort of much smaller categories, like things going on outside of the window, looking out the window, displays and posters on the wall, which was very about 3% of the time. Which is also quite interesting given how much time we all spend arguing about displays. It was by far the smallest of any of those that we collected. But I mean, if you put all of those things together, then actually it's sort of the number, it added up to sort of just over 50%. So my sort of takeaway from that is I think students feel like they are distracted a lot of the time by a lot of different things. And that's, I think, the sort of core message that then underlies a lot of the rest of the stuff, that I try to do with schools.
So it's the other children, and yet, I kind of rage against this a little bit. It's a blog post I've written over the years, which stirred up a fair bit of debate / backlash. It was about the wisdom of sitting in rows.
Right. Yeah.
Because it feels to me like if attention is a big issue, which we think it is, and children are the biggest distractor, why are you sitting them so that they're just literally facing their friends, which is such a big distraction? And yet that for some people that's like controversial. They say, "Oh, I like them sitting in groups," and rows is all like a prison or something. And you think, well, surely securing attention is the most important aspect.
I mean, I would agree with you, and I certainly sit my students in rows, and I think once you know how limited attention is, and once you know the extent to which students report being distracted, I think everything else follows on from those premises, doesn't it? Again, all of these things are best guesses because we can never, at least currently, we can never sort of accurately measure the attentional state of any one student at any one time. So what we have to do is sort of assume that there's a high likelihood they are likely to be distracted by a number of sources, and then try our best to mitigate against those as much as possible. And as you say, unless you have a lot of other very, very well honed routines that work really well in terms of managing behavior in other ways, then you can maybe have a seating plan that didn't necessarily require them to face you. But I mean, I can imagine it working, but I can't see it working in many ways, in many places.
It's interesting because obviously that study was predominantly with older students, wasn't it? And I do think sometimes that finding can get really skewed, and I've seen it on my travels where very, very little children are then sat in rows, and you're thinking that's not necessarily the best way for the way those children should be learning at that age and stage. So I think it's so important for teachers to understand research and to actually say, well, that study was done with older students who needed to maintain that full attention for an extended period of time, and they change from room to room to room, so they've not got like a set place all day for the full 6 hours they're at school like they might do in a primary setting. They're not necessarily trying to do a play-based pedagogy. They're not trying to do this. So it's the framing of the findings and putting it through the lens of the phase of the children. And it's interesting about the rows in primary a lot of the time, because we'll do the direct instruction bit, the teaching bit, on the carpet, and very often that bit will be in the rows, and then when they go off to do whatever it is that they're doing, then that's a little bit more free flowing or a slightly different seating position. And it's not that younger children shouldn't be concentrating or attending for the whole lesson, but they might just be doing different things within that period of time in a different setup. So I think the
I mean,
define
I think
really
that's
careful.
why I think you have to, be conscious of the attention. I think that when you're teaching, let's say you're teaching, number stuff to year one, and they're, at the table, and you're showing them stuff at the screen or whatever, and you still need their attention there. And if they're sat facing someone who's rather than, it's still the same issue,
Yeah,
but of course they're not spending that time all day. But the come of the or and having time to move the tables around and all that. So I agree. When it's on the carpet, they seem to be in that way.
Yeah.
But then I've been to a lot of primary classrooms where I actually think the attention isn't helped by the where they're sat. You're just thinking they're just all busy talking, and then the maths is being explained over there. They are supposed to be facing that way, but they're not. So I feel like it, that's an issue. But what about? I mean, so that's the evidence about around other things, but then so we have to manage attention, don't you? So you can't just assume in a room of people that. I mean, that thing of mind wandering, that's just a human thing, isn't it? It's not like because the children are. I mean, is it sometimes people say things like, "Well, it's my children," or it's because they've always on their phones, or I mean, is there any evidence that attention amongst young people is worse now than ever, or is it just a sort of general state of?
well, yeah, it depends. It depends a bit how you measure it. There's evidence that that I mean, people, it really really in general, but yeah, but especially young people will do things sort of indicative of not paying attention very well. So they'll task switch, for example. They'll try and multitask. They'll jump between things on phones. Because often technology gives you sort of the illusion that you can do multiple things at the same time, but that's not actually true. All you do is you sequentially switch from one task to another task, and each time you do that, there's a efficiency sort of lag. So we do those sorts of behaviours, the inefficient attention behaviours, more when those things get measured. What I don't think actually there's any good evidence for really is that is actually that's the result of any sort of deeper underlying like biological or cognitive change in people. So I don't think our attention span, in inverted commas, is any less than it was. We're perfectly capable of learning to pay attention just as effectively as people ever have been. It's just that we've sort of learned to operate in an environment and we've learned behaviors which don't always help us to do that. So it's more a sort of habitual thing rather than an underlying ability, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. So you kind of that illusion of like the kids are like talking and doing that, but I'm doing my work.
Yeah,
That you think you're multitasking, but really you're not. You're switching, and is
yeah,
that
exactly. Yeah. I mean, in effect, I probably to the point where they're very bored of hearing about it. But especially with my older students, my sixth form students, I talk a lot about how limited their attention capacities are, how little they can get in, and therefore, actually, if you're not fully focused on the thing that you're doing, you can't just assume that what the teacher's saying or what your eyes are vaguely pointing at is going to go in if you're also chatting to your friend or thinking about what you're having for tea tonight or those sorts of things. Now, as you said before, it's completely human to be distracted at times. I mean, it happens naturally. We've evolved to be distractible. So it's not that there's a sort of shame or there's any kind of penalty for being distracted. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to sort of highlight where this is happening and hold people to account for being distracted. What you're trying to do is just point out that this is inevitable, this does happen, but also you then can control it and bring it back. And if you know how precious and how limited it is, then that bringing it back becomes sort of more important and something that you should really prioritize and do as much as you possibly can.
And it's the distractibility thing. I talk about when I talk about attention with teachers of younger children is that that's a developmental timeline as well. It's not, you're not born with everybody has X amount of attention and for this amount of time, and that distractibility is much greater in younger children as well.
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
jelly to the wall sometimes.
Yeah.
And also, I say to teachers of younger children, this is why we just have to say at some points, year one, let's go and look at the man with the leaf blower, because nobody's going to do anything until we've all had a look at him, and then come back again. And then
although interestingly, sort of teachers of year one and those sort of early years stages, their sort of ratings for their children's ability to pay attention are very, very accurate in terms of predicting later school outcomes and success. So that within the cohorts, those sort of small changes, obviously, yeah, you're right, at a developmental level, they're way behind. But actually, you can see the developing ability to control attention, and those things. Yeah, they predict long-term educational outcomes and things really, like very, very successfully.
It's fascinating. But I suppose it makes sense if you can attend to things and let the things that you need to go in and do that really efficiently, you're going to be faster at then knowing things, which makes knowing more things even more which makes it easier. And it's a
that's right. Yeah, I think one of the sort of the things that I've been sort of trying to write a few things about recently has been sort of the idea that actually attention, what we might see as being, say, a memory problem or even an intelligence problem, they don't get it, might actually be sometimes an attention problem, because if you have failed to attend to the right thing in the first place, then of course you're not going to then look like you're able to process it very well. And we might be sort of going in and saying, look, they can't process this information. But actually, if they weren't properly attending, or if we fail to accurately cue them and help them to attend to exactly the right thing in the first place, then we're misidentifying where the problem is. And attention might actually play this role where it can help explain these problems, sometimes as well or even better than the thing we might identify the problem as being.
And I talk a lot about precision orientation when you're teaching, like being really precise about what you want children to look at, where you want them to look at it, what you want them to remember. This is what I want you to think about. This real precision, so that they're not accidentally broadening their kind of orientation horizons and looking technically in the wrong direction, almost cognitively.
Yeah.
So, and talk about with them.
Sorry, go on.
Cueing attention. So it's a phrase that you use and I found that since I've read your work that it's something I've learned from you. So this idea that this concept of cueing attention.
Yeah.
So can you explain to people what that is? And there are you write about a number of different ways you can cue for attention, because I feel like we talked about the problem. This is kind of the solution, sort of, isn't it?
Yeah. So the cueing attention. It really means just providing some sort of signal. I mean, traditionally, it's generally a sort of spatial cueing, is what I might say. So some sort of signal which tells a person where their attention should be focused. So in research, that might be sort of flashing a little light in a part of the screen that helps them to know where they're going to have to focus their attention in order to do a particular task. So that it would be the sort of standard way of cueing attention in space in research, and of course in class, in educational settings, we do that all the time through gesture, through verbal instructions, through live drawing things, doing things step by step, underlining and bolding and using colors and all of these things. Those are all spatial cues of attention. But the evidence is amazing, really, on these things, and it sort of links to what I was saying before about other skills being impacted by attention. So there's some research by Julie Markant and Dina Amso, they're called, in 2014, about it's called leveling the playing field, and this is where what looks like a sort of very clear correlation between IQ and memory. When you just give people a memory test, you also give them an IQ test, and then you find, well, surprise, surprise, there's a positive correlation between IQ and memory. Plus, can't say, my French is gone. Whatever, plus ça change. That's standard, isn't it? Actually, when they then adapt that task so it just contains a spatial cue, so there's a little light flashing that tells the participants where they need to focus their attention, that correlation completely disappeared. So what that implies is that actually it wasn't an intelligence problem that affected their memory. It was that they just were struggling to pay attention to the right place in the first place. And you can also see this in other things. So there's another very similar study by the same authors to do with socioeconomic status. And again, you find this correlation between socioeconomic status and performance on these memory tasks. And again, if you cue attention, then you can remove that correlation. So you level that socioeconomic playing field. So that's sort of cueing attention in space. And although we sort of implicitly do that all the time as teachers, I think that certainly really makes me always feel how clearly and how specifically am I doing that. And Emma sort of just talked nicely about that then. And I guess that from primary right the way up to when I'm teaching year 13s now, I'm incredibly specific about where I want them to be focused. Not just on page 36, read the paragraph, but exactly, are we all on making sure they know, right, not just page 36, are we turning to page 36, and then which paragraph, and it starts with this letter or this word, and we're going to start there, and maybe it'll be on the visualizer as well. So I'm cueing it much more intentionally so that there should be no problems with them knowing exactly where they should be focusing their attention. So that would be cueing attention in space. But actually, I also think that you can cue attention very effectively in time. And what I mean by that is that you can present information in such a way as to make it clear that that information is going to be important, and that cues attention. So this comes from a line of research into, so it's sometimes called interpolated testing. So you have sort of information being delivered, like a seminar or something, and at various points in between, you just have a little recap test. And what we find is, unsurprisingly, the test helps their memory for what's gone before. That would be sort of classic retrieval practice. But it also improves their memory for things that come after the test, which is weird, because you can get these sort of things then when the tested group do better on their final bit of information than the non-tested group, even though actually that experience has been identical for both groups. So they've had a bit of information, and then they get, a bit of a survey about attention, and then a final test. That's the same for both, but the tested group do better on that. So it's moved into the future. It's sometimes called the forward testing effect. And one of the explanations for that potentially is that you're cueing attention. You're creating a test expectancy. And so people think, well, I'm going to be tested.
An example of that. So you taught some material, and you tell the students you're going to have a test. And so that fact that they might have a test helps them focus their attention whilst you're explaining.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in a sort of more everyday classroom thing. Okay, in 2 minutes you're going to need to discuss X. I'm going to come to you. I'm going to come to some of you to see your thoughts on Y. Even things like that are creating that expectancy that you will need this information and you're going to have to use it. And so any check for understanding really in class, I think also creates, providing it's done in a way that has sort of good participation and thinking ratio, and everyone feels they could be asked, it creates an expectation that you might have to use that information. So actually it moves forward in time as well, and that cues attention in time. So we think we've got sort of those two things going on. And I try to sort of get both of those in basically wherever I possibly can, as much as I possibly can.
This is really interesting, Mike, because when I work with teachers, when we're talking about attention, especially with younger children, I'll say to them, make sure you say to the children, this is the most important bit, and this is the bit I want you to remember, because otherwise you stood there for 10 minutes and done this information about Florence Nightingale or information about the Shang dynasty. And those little children, as novice learners, are sitting there thinking, well, which bit of all of that you've just told me is actually the bit you want me to be thinking about? And I say to teachers, it sounds really obvious to say, this part here is the bit I want you to remember, and this part here is the most important bit. So how are we going to remember it? And I feel like I'm saying something really stupid and really obvious, but does that fit with that kind of orientation of attention idea?
Absolutely. And I think you say that sounds really obvious, but that's quite a challenge for us as teachers, because we think everything we say is important, don't we? So we have to actually, you have to be quite sort of you have to hold yourself sort of quite accountable. You have to analyze your practice quite hard to break it down into identifying actually what is the absolute core knowledge that I want here, that I can therefore cue their attention to. Because otherwise you end up with the sort of the teaching equivalent of when students highlight every single word on a page. Which,
exactly.
And it becomes meaningless.
Yeah, and if you're a novice learner, you don't know what what the most important parts are, and your teacher's just talked at you for however long, and you as a novice learner were meant to think of everything you've just said, which bit do I need to hang on to? If I've got limited resources to store all this away, and then that's when you've got one child remembering the random fact about something.
They all remember tiny different bits of everything else. And yeah, exactly.
So this is, I mean, one of your blog posts from earlier this year in June, it says managing attention in classrooms is a social justice issue, because the evidence that you've just, I mean, you've written it up there.
Yeah.
It's one of them is about IQ, and one of them is, like you say, is about socioeconomic status. And this idea that you can flatten those correlations once you introduce attention cueing. I mean, that's pretty mind-blowing. I mean, I really, when I read that, I was thinking, God, that's such a powerful finding. And of course, it's just one study that you're talking about, etc. But still, if that's the case, then, I think really our emphasis on queuing for attention should be much, much higher. You've got some techniques where you're thinking about, I don't know, cold calling and classroom routines like that, checks for understanding, show me boards. But if sometimes that's sort of framed as sort of participation, which is not a bad word, but participation is only a proxy for attention. You're sort of saying you're focusing your attention on the learning, not sort of like eyes front looking at me, so it looks like you're with me, but you're actually thinking about the material.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I want to unpack this more, like how do we run a room so that if that's the game that's possible, that we can literally flatten out the curve against socioeconomic status by queuing for attention instead of not queuing for attention, we really should be doing that. Right? I mean, that's like, so what are the different ways that we can queue for attention in practice?
Okay, so right. So, well, I mean, I think the primary two things that we've sort of said there would be queuing them in space. So that's being very
so that's really specific. Where to look on the board, on the page.
Exactly, the exact location.
That specific thing.
Yeah, and depending on exactly how we teach, that would be different things. But as a really simple example, that might be making sure that if you are using a PowerPoint, it reveals things in small steps rather than in one go. Right. Things like that are going to help the exact cueing of the attention to the information that you want them to be attending to at each stage.
Yeah.
As I said, so things like live drawing do something very similar. But your verbal instructions, your gestures, it's about being very, very precise about where you want attention focused. When indeed you do want it very tightly focused, as Emma said, sometimes we're doing other things as well, and that's then I do think that the queuing in time is something that we can sort of do at a relatively low cost as well, actually. So I mean, you can literally say, well, you are going to have a test in this, I'm going to expect you to know X, Y, and Z, and sometimes that's appropriate, but just you need to be able to report the two most important things to your partner in 2 minutes or something like that. That's still going to create that same effect. I'm going to need you to use this information to do something. You could do that. If even better, if you can set some specific targets within that. So target setting is quite powerful for attention, because it gives us that overarching sort of top-down goal that we need to do. So, I often sort of make up a fictional previous year group. You know how the previous year group was always worse than the current year group. Oh my year, last year's lot were terrible. They could only remember 3 things from this. You know, those things.
Yeah.
I bet you'll be able to do better. Things like that will create again that sort of attention cue in time. And the other one actually is that I try and do quite a lot is curiosity and sort of interest yourself has been shown to, you know, if you encourage people to read something with curiosity, that sort of cues the fact that not that they'll need it for a test, but at least that they're likely to enjoy it in some way. That, you know, that can in certain circumstances be quite a useful thing. None of these things are going to be silver bullets on their own, but actually they're things that we can add into our everyday classroom dialogue reasonably easily.
Does it link to, I mean, thinking like when we did one of our podcast interviews, I'm losing track of when it was now, with Efrat first, and she talked about prediction.
Yeah.
And
right,
so
yeah.
she wrote about, so predicting, for example, you know, what might happen at the end of a story. If I double the left-hand side, what might happen here? If I change it to an odd number, or in silence, you know, when I heat this up, what might we observe? So predicting things, does that work because you're
I think, you know,
waiting to find out?
Yeah, this will be surprising for you. I bet you'll like this because you won't see where it's going. You know, those sorts of things. Just to, I mean, I think in Efrat's example, that's it's deliberately to create that sort of prediction error, isn't it? You want them to predict it and actually to be surprised they got it wrong, but also just to create that general sense of interest and curiosity, and the idea that you know, this is great stuff. And I mean, I set my year 13s over the weekend. They had to watch an hour-and-a-half documentary on the measurement of happiness in Bhutan. And so, you know, which I genuinely think is a fantastic documentary. It's on BBC, but I had to sell that to them quite hard, and I used a lot of that curiosity. You're going to find this fantastic. It's amazing. There's, you know, attempt to measure these difficult, you know, sort of invisible psychological things in the real world. It's great. You'll love it. And you know what? Some of them came back and said, you know, it was all right. So yeah, who knows? Maybe they would have done that anyway. But it's those sorts of things. Yeah. Well, I mean, they're 17.
For some students saying it's all right, that means it was absolutely superb. You know, they just like
exactly.
To play.
That's what I'm taking it as anyway. Yeah.
So, just in terms of attention, then, Michael, there's so many factors at play with attention, aren't there? There's just like I don't want to say basic, but there's kind of the physiological. Put your eyes here. Put your finger on that line. Make sure you're looking at this. There's the kind of physical cueing in of that.
Yeah.
But then there's all those other things about that kind of in the motivating aspect, and the kind of the curiosity aspect, and the delayed gratification aspect. And there's all of that. So attention initially just seems to be, where at first glance, look at the right thing, listen to the right thing, hope it goes in. But actually it's a really multifaceted aspect that teachers need to be aware of. And we talked with Dan Willingham last night about the cognitive aspects, behavioural aspects, emotional aspects, and all of those three feed into attention as well, don't they?
They do. So I mean, this is, I guess, where the sort of the attention, you know, where if you think about that as a sort of processing stream, attention, where that's going into your working memory.
Mm.
So then, if we want to actually be able to process the things we're attending to, what we also need is a sort of a relatively uncluttered working memory that you know, that's helping us to do that. And that's where all of these other things are going to compete. So if you've got, you know, if you're anxious and you've got other sort of worrying thoughts knocking around, and like I say, if you're very tired, or in a really bad mood, or those sorts of things. If you're very hungry, all of these other things, motivational issues, they are going to compete for space within that as well, which means that actually, even if we've got people focusing on the right thing, we're not guaranteed to make everybody be able to process it in exactly the same way, especially when the things that we're asking people to do are relatively complex. And I think this is where, whilst I'm very passionate about focusing attention and things, this is where, even if we cue everybody's attention really effectively, we're never going to completely equalize the playing field for everybody. because what we can't do is take away all the other internal things that are going to be competing for the outcome of attention, for what we've attended on, and the ability to process all of that in working memory. So inevitably, those things are going to play a role, and there are ways to try to manage those things as much as possible. Clearly, anxiety, we have strategies to do our best to manage those, both in the classroom and sort of more therapeutically and things like that. But they are always going to compete in what is, again, another sort of limited capacity environment. So that is always going to be a challenge.
There's so many modulating factors, aren't there? I mean, we talk about, I think it's a universally well understood thing that working memory is limited, but I don't know whether everybody's kind of had a look at that, the attention bit being a limiting factor in the same way necessarily.
No, I mean, I would agree. My sort of take on the sort of the cognitive science revolution is that it's been great, but has missed out some bits, and everyone tends to think that about their own subject. But I mean, for example, if you look at the sort of initial teacher training guidelines, there's a couple of really sort of fleeting mentions of attention, mostly to do with the sort of assumption that if working memory load is okay, attention will be fine. And that's it. So there's lots about working memory and almost nothing really about attention, sort of tangential references. And I think that's, if not totally the wrong way around, then certainly it should be at least as much focus on the attention side. I mean, certainly it was never discussed at all when I was learning to teach. It was never properly discussed in the staff room. I think you'd sort of lament attention, wouldn't you? So they don't pay attention. That was the level, but there was never an sort of questioning about why that might be or how you might improve those things. It was a sort of a bit fatalistic and a topic for frustration rather than actual sort of study, I think.
I love how these things connect. One of my favorite papers, I've written a blog about this, and we feature it in one of the walkthroughs books, is the Marge model from Arthur Shimomura.
Yeah.
M is motivate, A is attention, then it talks about R is about relational models, like organizing things, and generate and evaluate. And it's like, I feel like the MA, the motivate and attend go together. So this, and it's the idea. I mean, Shimomura talks about a study in a university campus in America where they worked out that something like only 45% of the students are paying attention at any one time.
Yeah.
And I always use that example to sort of say that you can talk about specific children and having specific emotional issues and family issues and all that coming in, because teachers always say that.
Yeah.
It's like, why might children not focus attention? It's because of emotional baggage. I'm saying, no, that's true, but when you're the teacher, you can't see that. You can't get into all of that.
Yeah.
All you can do is say, look, there might be a zillion reasons why you're mind wandering or distracted, so come into the space, be present, get attention. And he talks about occasionally things like, attention grabbers to snap people into attention. But of course, those are then highly memorable as well. So you have to sort of go into another phase, but you can sort of bring people out.
Mm-hmm.
But then also things like, he talks about the effective things, so making it personal, saying things like, so what would you think if you were in this situation? How would you feel?
Right.
And it's like, so it's about me now. Oh, great, it's about me.
Yeah.
And all those sorts of things are interesting. Like, we're kind of selfish. So if you feel like they're asking, what would it feel like if you yourself were sitting in the car and it went around the corner? So now I'm imagining me doing it rather than the little figure in the diagram, which is kind of boring. It's about me. It's all those sorts of things. So there's lots of like little ideas that he has around that, which I find interesting. And he talks about this idea that motivate is to motivate your brain. It's not to motivate your sort of psyche, but to motivate your thought process. You need to have a reason. So I think he's alluding there into that sort of queuing in time, because it's got to be about, I do this so that will happen. All these things are so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like your kind of framing, which is kind of has this imperative aspect to it. It's sort of, you're sort of saying, like, if it's the case, we really should be focusing on cueing attention. It's something we're really, really focused on because it's such a powerful effect. And I'm finding that I don't know, it doesn't have the profile it needs. So it's really brilliant that you're banging a drum on this. I mean, who else is doing it? Do you feel like I don't know, who else is talking about this stuff? Is there a body of research that people should go to look at?
Um,
Or is it just hobalog?
I mean, there's not very much in classroom settings. Then no, there's still not very much. There are a number of studies that have come out recently about sort of technology and those sorts of things, mobile phones, as you might imagine, things like that, which unsurprisingly sort of find these detrimental effects. Very little on actual sort of teaching practices. I'm trying to think about. There was Peps McRae does a sort of weekly blog, if you know of that, which he's done a couple on attention recently, and there was one study in there that I noticed that I hadn't seen before, and I was very interested. I need to read it, and it was something that a teacher did, but I haven't read it properly yet. So I need to sort of look into that. I think it was from the last year, but no, there isn't very much on that. I think what I tend to then say to teachers is, that clearly is a contrast to something like, say, retrieval practice, in which we have actually enormous amounts of classroom-based evidence for this, beyond the research studies. We don't have those things to the same degree for attention. That sort of means that the starting point maybe is just a little bit further away, but it doesn't mean that there aren't sort of sensible things that you can be trying to do. Reducing distraction is, and cueing attention is going to be beneficial. I think, it's just hard. I can't sort of envisage how it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
But what it means is that potentially exactly that looks like is going to possibly vary a little bit between classrooms. It'll depend on your routines, it'll depend on your subject and your school environment and your stage. So exactly how you cue it, I mean, as a, I guess as an example, lots of primary teachers might have a sort of particular jingle that they use to cue attention, something like that, or particular countdowns or those sorts of things, which you might not use for older students in exactly the same way. So exactly how you do it is up for grabs, I guess. And therefore, I think this is sort of quite nice, because you can adapt that and you can personalize it. But if you have that sort of underlying assumption that really never assume that they're paying attention unless you've very clearly cued them to do so, and never assume that they will think a piece of information is important enough to attend to unless you've made it seem important enough to attend to, those underlying principles, I think, are quite good ones to start with.
So I was going to ask you, Mike, where are the gaps in terms of the research base at the moment? So where are you thinking about there's a black hole here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we don't know is, we know on a sort of big level that students who teachers report being distracted in lessons don't do as well at school. We know on a sort of more micro level, this is some of the stuff I did on my PhD, that students who don't do very well on sort of lab tests of attention also report being distracted more in class. So there's a relationship there between these attention control skills and the distraction in a particular lesson. What we haven't got is the sort of stuff in between that might track, how does this process then unfold? Where do they go from being distracted in a lesson to ending up not doing so well in their exams overall? So we don't know if, is it just a linear process? Does it come in fits and starts? Do people's attention sort of improve and wax and wane? We don't know in terms of being able to compare them with other people in their cohorts. Do people go up and down or not? So what my dream attention study in school. So if there is anyone listening with a sort of spare £1 million who wants to fund me to do this, that'd be amazing. But my sort of dream education study in schools would be a sort of longitudinal one where you track students for maybe 2 or 3 years, and at various points, say 2 or 3 times a year, maybe 3 times a year, you'd give them a sort of a battery of kind of experimental lab style attention control tests. You do a student sort of questionnaire about their experiences of distraction in the class. You ask their teachers and you ask their parents. And then you do that repeatedly, say 3 times a year for 3 years or for 5 years or something like that. And if you did that, you would get an absolute wealth of information that we've just that hasn't really been sort of tested or tracked before in terms of just the individual differences. So you'd be able to sort of compare how these things developed and the difference between different individuals, and does the gap just get bigger and bigger and bigger or not, or we just don't know those things. And also then you'd really be able to sort of map out the process that leads to the educational outcomes, which are not great if you don't have good attention control skills. So that hopefully then gives us an idea of like, well, which tests are most predictive, for example, over the long period of time, and therefore how might we try and intervene as early as possible.
Well, so it sounds like, so what we need is we need to put a call out there for someone to fund Mike.
That's why I'm here. Yeah,
longitudinal. It's a big pitch. This whole thing has just been a pitch.
Yeah.
That we need. I mean, I think this is a useful thing to do, to think of the sorts of experiment you need to do to prove something. But I think there's already, a lot for us to get our teeth into there, and we're getting a serious red flag here about time. So we're going to have to wrap things up because we're just so into it. Actually, against the odds. I'm focusing my attention quite strongly here because this to me is so interesting, and it is the core of it, and it feels to me like something we should talk more about. And I'm just going to say the reason we asked you on here, because I feel like I can't think of many other people who are focusing so strongly on attention, and you've brought it to our attention through the work that you're doing and promoting it. So we're really hoping this helps shine a light on that, so people can keep focusing on it and read your work further. But honestly, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found it useful, because it's so interesting, and I'd love to carry on the conversation, but we're just running out of time.
No, well, thanks very much for having me. I've loved it. It's been great.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, folks, look, I'm gonna strongly recommend that you need to read every blog on hobblog.wordpress.com, especially all the ones about attention, because it's mind-blowing stuff. Try to catch Mike if you're near a research shed when he's talking, because the sessions are great and very interactive, as I know from being at one. And thank you for joining us on Mind the Gap. Generally, I'd say we're a purple patch for just having so many brilliant guests, and it's just so interesting, all of this. Keep listening, and we'll see you again on the next episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner, and I've been presenting with my co-host Tom Sherrington. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review, share on social media, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel, search for Mind the Gap with Tom and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership, and our producer for today's episode was Luke Kemper.